it turns around, and it's the most beautiful thing when students who don't trust you because you're some new guy, and teachers who don't trust you, or principals who don't trust you, and you go in every day and you show them, no, I'm here, I care, I'm here, I care. And pretty soon you win them over, and then they bend over backwards to give you whatever they can possibly give you. And it's a wonderful thing. But, it's sad that we have to fight that hard before we can even get to the music.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Everything Band, a podcast that features conversations with composers, conductors, and performers of music for winds and percussion. My name is Mark Connor. I'm a composer and educator, and each week I have the great fortune to speak with and share the stories and wisdom of musicians and leaders in the band community. Before we begin, I'd like to thank all of you for listening. I really appreciate your time, and I hope that you are finding value from these interviews. I rely on word of mouth and social media to bring the show to new listeners. If you think you know one or two people who might find these interviews useful, please let them know about it. You can also help by following me and sharing posts on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube. Everything Band is sponsored by Celtic Horizon Arts, the leading tour operator for the arts in the United Kingdom and Ireland. Celtic Horizon Arts hosts bands, orchestras, and choirs from around the world, and they are now taking inquiries for their 2020 Band Festival in Limerick, Ireland. This festival, featuring composer Johan de May, will include clinics, masterclasses, and cultural exchanges. Bands and individual musicians are all welcome to participate and can find out more by contacting Keith Kelly at keith@CelticHorizonTours.com or find out more on Facebook at Celtic Horizon Arts. Now, on to the episode and this week's guest, Vince Gassi. Hi, Vince.
How you doing, Mark?
I'm doing well. Thanks for joining me.
My pleasure.
So, Vince, I've known of you for some time now, and we met officially at Midwest just this past December. And so I was wondering if you could introduce yourself to the listeners.
Well, sure. So I live in Toronto, Canada, and I grew up about 7-hour drive northeast of here in a little steel town called Sault Ste. Marie. And I have 3 brothers and a sister, all musicians. My family was very musical. And so I didn't start any formal music training until I got to high school in grade 9. But once I started, I didn't start until grade 9, but I was surrounded by it. Classical music, jazz, R&B bands, a lot of variety. And then when I got into high school and picked up a trumpet, I saw a trumpet and I fell in love. I was starstruck. And that changed my life. It gave me a reason to go to school. Band, like for a lot of us, just became the reason I went to school every day was to go and play my trumpet. And I used to hang around after school. I'd go to the band room and just stay there until the music teacher closed up at 5 o'clock, kicked me out, and I was there the first thing in the morning. I actually went to school in post-secondary school in London, Canada, at the University of Western Ontario. And eventually I wound up in Toronto, but I did spend a year in Los Angeles. After my university was finished, I went and studied trumpet there for a year with Claude Gordon. And I was at the Dick Grove School of Music in LA. And those were 2 game changers. They taught me so much. They taught me about the ability to take a systematic approach to what you're doing, to your development, to your learning, and which I didn't really have prior to that. High school was a lot of fun musical experiences, but I took my trumpet home every single day. In grade 9, I took it home every day, and I played for hours every day. Didn't know what I was doing, but I just loved it so much, and I played every day. Went back to school, played in music class. And that Christmas of grade 9, my grade band teacher, Wayne Jones, who approached me and said, "How would you like to play in the senior band?" And again, that was another moment where, I was just over the top, over the moon, I guess. So I played in the senior band in my grade 9 year. And in the summertime, I had another wonderful experience. Some of the senior music students had got a grant from the government, basically our summer job was to practice as a brass quintet and learn, a bunch of repertoire, and we would go and play concerts at summer camps and just anywhere we could find. And so I was practicing and playing music all day, every day in the summer. So I really, it was a great experience.
You mentioned that you started in grade 9. Was that the first time that you read music, or were exposed to lessons or a formal teaching?
No, that was the first time I learned how to read music. In Canada, or at least in Ontario, or at least in Sault Ste. Marie, there were no middle schools, no grade 7, 8 programs, or even in our K to 8 schools, you might have had vocal music, but there was no instrumental music until we got to grade 9. And so that was the very first time I picked up a brass instrument, learned how to read music, and went from there. But so I know that experience would have been far different were I to grow up in the United States. So, something in my favor was that I had a strong desire to play, and I just loved it. It's not even something I thought I could describe. If you asked me at the time, what is it about this you like so much? I'm not even sure I would have had the words then to describe how much I enjoyed that experience, or what was it that just drew me into it. But it did, and I stayed with it.
Yeah. So I don't know, I'm sure there's someone out there, listeners out there, who know about the research into like when we start instruments and when we start kids. And, I've heard varying things about, well, it's best in 5th grade, it's best in 6th grade, it's best in 4th grade. And so it's a very different thing to start in 9th grade. Mm-hmm. The other thing that I picked up on there was the idea, I just spoke with Larry Gukin for this week's episode, or this past week's episode, and he and I talked about the importance of community in band. And one of the things that I've really remember from my experience in high school band was that band room was such a place. It was a haven. It was a safe place for me. And so it sounds like it was a similar situation for you.
It was home to me. I just felt like that's the only place I wanted to be. Unfortunately, it might have been to the detriment of my other subjects, but it was just where I wanted to spend all my time, and where music was so powerful. I also had the sense, I didn't start writing music until much later in my life. I think the first piece that I had published was maybe 2006. So I was, I was in my 40s, and but for all those years that I, was playing, and I was a trumpet player, I had in the back of my mind this sense that writing could be something that I would be interested in doing. Steven Spielberg, I saw a great speech that he did. I forget where it was, but it's Sometimes a Dream Whispers. And he talked about how what he wanted to do, his career as a film director, came screaming at him right from the get-go, but that sometimes with some people, your dreams, they're not always that in your face. Sometimes they're this little voice in the back of your head that can get drowned out by a lot of other noise, and you have to be very sensitive and careful to that. And that kind of describes what was there in the back of my head in terms of composition and writing. I've always been fascinated by how the arrangement of sounds could change your emotional and physical state. And so I didn't understand it when I was in high school, like, how to put notes together to achieve those kinds of emotional effects in listeners. I didn't understand it then, but I was aware that it was, that it was happening, and that people, like composers, this is what they do. They have something they wish to express, and they go about putting that down on paper. Well, when I was in high school, anyway, back in the 70s.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So And then I came to it later on. I'd gone through a period. After I came back from Los Angeles, I was there in 1984, and I had a great year. As I said, I just absorbed so much and learned. I learned things in 1984 that I'm still unfolding and unpacking now. That's how powerful that experience was. But when I came back, I was playing and I was teaching in elementary school, actually, teaching band as an itinerant music teacher in elementary school, and practicing hours a day and starting to raise a family. And I got to the point where some years later I was kind of burning out a bit, and I thought I'm going to put my horn in the case for a while and be there with my kids growing up. And that was good for a little while. And I realized, several months after that, what I was missing was the creative process, the creative aspect of being a human being. And I just, I decided that I owed it to myself. I owed it to my family. I even owed it to my teachers that I studied with in LA at the Dick Grove School. What an amazing school. Remind me to tell you about that. I decided I was going to write a piece of music. I always wanted to do that. And I didn't care. I didn't care if it was, because, you have those voices. Hey, what if it's not good? What if, you're not a writer. Oh, come on. There's so many people who are much better than you, and you have those negative thoughts. But I thought, oh, nobody has to see it. And you know what? I just want to write one complete piece of music, start to finish. And so I did that. And that was the start. That piece got published locally here. And then my next piece, that was for stage band, jazz ensemble. And my next piece was for concert band, and that got published. And so it's kind of been the way I started.
Just to backtrack a little bit, you mentioned Wayne Jones. And do you have any other lessons that you carry from him that you used in your years of teaching? Because you taught for a long time.
Well, I have one related to writing. When I mentioned that brass quintet we did in the summertime, he did an arrangement of a Carpenter's medley, We've Only Just Begun, and various other tunes. And it blew me away that somebody I knew put notes, like somebody I knew, not some composer who's, long past or far away, or in the United States where I thought they all were. But he did this arrangement. Somebody I knew did this arrangement, and it was so cool to play. And that was the first sort of inkling I had that, this is something that I don't know, people do. Maybe I could do it. Could I do it? I think what you're asking me, though, is more in reference to how I approached teaching. When I was teaching in elementary school, I did 11 years in elementary and 13 years in secondary school. I brought with me the experience that I had. I couldn't wait to get into music every day. He was passionate about music. He enjoyed it. It was fun for him to share his passion about music with his students. And again, if you had asked me that question when I was in high school, I'm not sure I would have been able to articulate that then. I would have just said, hey, I'm having fun. This is so much fun. And maybe when it comes down to it, maybe that's what it all boils down to. We talk about a lot of other reasons why it's important to our development as human beings and culture. And ultimately, I think I just had a lot of fun. And when I was teaching, I don't know that I made a direct point. I said to myself, well, I must make this fun for my students. I think I just started to have fun with it. I know that I wasn't able to get a lot of band music that was suited to the level of my kids, with the different ability levels and instrumentation that you're lacking. So I started writing out little, melodies and things to play for them. I wrote this one piece I got to tell you about. It's called Rain Dance. And I was sitting at dinner table one night with Allison, my lovely wife, and my two children. They were young then. And I was explaining my frustration about not having music that was, suitable to the kids that I was teaching. Something that was, how do you find music for kids? Well, then anyway, that only has three notes. They've just learned their third note and they're still playing out of easy steps or whatever band method you're using. And I wanted to put a piece of music in front of them to make them, hey, you're a musician. And so I was explaining this sort of in a frustrated way. And, why doesn't somebody write a piece like, and at that moment I stood up and went over to the piano like this. And I played this very, I was trying to be funny and make it humorous for them, for my wife and kids. And I played this thing on the piano and I thought, oh my gosh, that actually works. So I wrote this piece called Rain Dance. I called it Rain Dance, and my kids loved it. And pretty soon, all my colleagues in our school board up here, all the music teachers that I knew, were asking for it because they were in a similar, place where they wanted music that has three notes, four notes. I mean, who wants to only play out of a band method? Especially back then, there weren't as many as, there's some really fine band methods out now. But back then there was sort of a lack of them. And we didn't have any money to buy new stuff. Basically, I had maybe $100 between 5 schools. I mean, that gets you one piece. And then there's instrument repairs, so it was tough going around to 5 schools, 3 schools a day sometimes. And trying to, you're working in, each school has a different culture of how they value things like instrumental music. And there are some teachers who say, well, no, Susie's not going to instrumental music today because she didn't do her math homework. Well, okay, I don't keep Susie from going to math because maybe she didn't practice last night, So there's a cultural education that we are called upon to engage in. Now, that's not the case in every school. Some schools, when you walk through that door, they just think it's, the best thing since coffee. So it wasn't always easy, to answer your question. It's kind of long-winded, I know, but not always easy to walk into a new school or to a school and, bring that passion. I mean, you bring your passion, you teach from who you are, but there's a lot of things that can sort of beat you down if you're not careful.
Yeah. So can you expound on that a little bit? So how did you avoid being beaten down?
I'm not altogether sure that I did completely. I fought a lot of battles with teachers, with parents, with administrators, and I also had some great relationships with parents, teachers, students, administrators. I think when they see who you are, when they see that you care, that you're a person of integrity, and that your purpose, as you see it yourself, your sort of your raison d'etre is to share that passion with kids, and I think you can win them over. I remember at one elementary school, of course, a lot of schools that I taught in don't even have a room for you to go to. You sometimes have a portable outside of the school, or oftentimes you're teaching in the gymnasium on stage while there's a gym class going on, because that's all they can do. So, and this was the case at one school. I was teaching on the stage, and there was gym class going on. There were workmen, drilling holes in the wall to put, picture frames up. And I went to the principal and I said, this is a music class. I can't work like this. And here's what I need. And that principal said, well, can you kind of work around it? And I left feeling so disappointed. But I'll tell you, I stuck it out. Eventually, that principal gave me my own room, and he actually was a flute player and started coming to my class once a week. I was speaking to him one time about, some students that were a little bit harder to deal with, discipline, situations. And he said, I'll tell you what, I'm going to come to your class once a week. Not as a principal. I want to learn how to play the flute better. He sat in my class, my music class, once a week for months. And I'll tell you, that principal turned around, that school music program turned around, and they didn't believe in me. They did not believe in me because of, the experience of maybe a previous music teacher that was there who, I'm not going to say anything bad about it, but it wasn't a good experience. And they assumed I was sort of going to be the same. But I was determined that I wanted to make that work and that I cared. I wasn't going to give up. And I just went in every day. And sometimes you're going in the trenches.
Vince, what advice would you give to a band director who's stepping into a new situation, or perhaps a young band director just starting out?
Well, I'll tell you, what comes to mind? I had this colleague some years ago, and we would get together once a month as, music teachers on Toronto Catholic board. And we would have, workshops and in-service. We have clinicians come in. But invariably, the best part of those once a month in-services were on the breaks when the music teachers could talk to each other. And so there's always this one teacher. His name is Ed Kazmarek, wonderful guy. And he always had the best, elementary school bands, the best middle school level bands. And everyone else was like, how do you do this? So one day I sat down, I said, Ed, how do you get kids to play so well like that? How do you do it? And he said, I just love them. I just love them. And I said, in my head, I'm going, well, okay, give me a real answer. What does that mean? And so I went away and I, kind of forgot about it for a while. And when I started to have programs that I was, turning around from, something that seems to be a struggle to success, where kids enjoy coming and they want to play their instruments and have fun doing concerts. It hit me then. I thought about all of the effort that I put in, but mostly my attitude toward them, and that, I just enjoyed being with them, and I wanted them to enjoy music as well. I wanted them to have that enjoyment. I wanted them to take that home with them, that feeling of they had a great experience in band today, and they can't wait to get back to tomorrow. Wasn't, always perfect and always that way, but that's when it hit me. That's what he meant. He loved it. He loved them. He loved sharing that with them. So beyond all of the technical things that we have to do, it's getting to the music. And, I have so many things I want to say. I hope you don't mind.
No, go for it.
So about 7 years ago, I became the conductor of the Brampton Concert Band. I was their community concert band in Brampton for about 5 years. And so we'd have a band rehearsal at night, and we'd go out for, a lemonade afterward, and we'd sit there and they would kind of like marvel. One time I walked in late and they were all there and they were kind of chuckling over something I had done or said. And I said, hey, what's so funny? And one of the band members said, they just don't know where you get all of your energy. And I have to admit, I'm very energetic in a band rehearsal. I'm like, I don't know, like I'm on, level 20 out of 10 sometimes. And I thought about it and I thought, I get it from the music. I had to think about that for about 10 seconds, and it hit me. I just love when you're together with a group of people and you're all devoted, committed to working at getting the music out of that, out of that piece of paper that you're looking at, to making great music together. And that just is where I get my energy. And I think that's what kids buy into, what they really not buy into it, but hook into it. So I saw this Star Trek Next Generation episode. I'm not sure if you were a fan, but there was one episode where the children on the Enterprise were sort of kidnapped onto this planet because they couldn't have children. Okay, so there was this little girl, and with an older gentleman, and he had this object that when you put your hands on it, it starts to make sounds and music. And he was trying to teach her, to just focus your mind, and music comes out of it. And I was thinking, I remember the first time I saw that episode, I thought, holy cow, what would we teach like? What would we do as music educators if we didn't have to worry about skill development? What would we do? How would we focus on that music and interpretation? And this is one of the things that I've been thinking about all this past week, knowing we were going to have this interview about the creative process. And I think one of your questions is what are some of the challenges that we face? I did this band workshop one time a few years ago, and it was with one of my pieces. It was a grade 4 piece called Tsunami. And I went in and I was working with the band, and I stopped and was kind of working on a woodwind passage. And I kind of realized, I thought to myself, what was I thinking? Why did I use this particular articulation, slur two tongue one, slur two tongue? Why didn't I do it another way? And so I sort of externalized that thought, and I asked the students, why not? Why not ask them? I said, what do you guys think about this way I did the articulation? They didn't know what to think. They kind of stared at me with a blank, expression. And I said, no, think about this. Let's play it the way it's written. Okay, now what about if we, change the articulation pattern or the slurring pattern to, the opposite, or something slur all or slur three. And as we tried each one, kids' hands went up and said, well, I kind of think this, or I kind of think that. And it hit me then that we spend so much time teaching technique, and so much time once they have achieved a certain level of technique, we spend so much more time drilling the notes and learning, brass. This is, you need to be softer here when the woodwinds are doing this. And it's just a lot of skill and a lot of repetitious rote drill. And when do we ever stop and engage players in the creative process? I know performance is creative, but I'm sure that a lot of times it cannot be. It can just be sort of, you're just drilling. So from that point on, I always tried to, talk about the piece, talk about what the composer is saying. How can we interpret this differently? I mean, even though the composer has written it one way, it's going to affect every student in that band or orchestra or choir, what have you. They're going to have a different experience of it. And that's important to focus into. I'm not saying we should, take half the band period and just talk about and not play. But there are lots of ways that we can engage those kids in the creative process, whether they're holding an instrument or we're doing a composition class or we're watching a film and, kind of talking about the music. And this was really something that was brought out in our province of Ontario curriculum. In 2000, we had this curriculum where the expectations were so prescriptive of what technically they had to be able to achieve on their instruments. And 10 years later, they rewrote that document, a different group of educators, and the focus was on the creative process. It was on the creative process, still on performance and composition and analysis, but it was all done through the lens of the creative process. And it's a paradigm shift that I don't think is universal yet.
So you mentioned earlier the importance of your experience in Los Angeles. Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Well, yeah. Initially I went there. So when I came out of high school, I was on fire to be a trumpet player, and I went to university thinking that was going to make it happen. And I actually struggled as a player when I was doing my undergrad. I had some different teachers who had different ideas about how to make a brass instrument work properly. And I was fortunate enough to come into contact with a very fine trumpet player. His name is Daryl Eaton. He just passed away last year. One of my my best mentors. So this was years ago, back in 79 or 80 maybe, and I was struggling in my playing. I wasn't getting better, and I'd come out of my trumpet lessons just sort of so discouraged. And I spoke to Daryl about it, and he mentioned this teacher that he had once studied with in California called Claude Gordon. And so I inquired about him, and I had, through some research, decided this is what I needed to do. I need to go to LA, and I need to study with the best guy that I think can help me on the planet. And all kinds of people said, well, there's lots of teachers here. Why don't you go to a teacher here? And some people called me a dreamer. And Daryl said, you know what? People who don't dream don't get anywhere. And once I heard that, and I was married at the time, and we were having our first child. My daughter was arriving in a few months, but I went anyway, and it was the best experience because, hands down, he taught me sort of the scientific, systematic approach. A, here's how to make it work, hands down. This is the only way it can work. And B, here's how to approach your training, your practicing, what you want to achieve. Here's how to get there. So that was, I used the word game changer before. That was another game changer. But while I was there, I was also going to school at the Dick Grove School of Music. And it was the same kind of approach to your musicianship. It was systematic. So here's the school. It was started out as a school for composing and arranging. So you take a 40-week program, and in your second 20 weeks, like the weeks 21 to 40, you had to write a big band arrangement in a different style every week. Every single week, you had to write it, conceive of it, copy it. No computers. This was all hand, written stuff, ink pens and stuff. And then you would take. So I was in the performance program at this time, and as a player, we had to do a session, a 3-hour session on Tuesday for all of the composer arranger students. So that was play down day, and we'd go into the recording studio, and it would all be set up like a real recording studio. Click tracks, headphones, baffles, recording engineers, and we would sit there, and we were the band, and we would play down all of these charts. And so, as a composer arranger, you had 10 minutes to do maybe 2 takes to make sure the notes are all right, and then the third take is the final one, and you'd take that away, that cassette tape, and you'd go up and you'd talk to your teacher after, and you'd analyze the chart. But we were sitting there for 3 hours just sight reading chart after chart after chart after chart. And so it was an integrated school where the the arranging students, the film composing students, the performance students, and the recording engineer students were all functioning like you would in downtown LA. So that, and then on Thursday we did the film composing play down day, and it was the same thing. Every composer came in with their track and their film, and we would play through it, and it was great. And then, I would go upstairs with the film composing students. I wasn't in that program, but I would, go to their class afterward, and they would put up their video, put the music to it, and talk about what worked and what didn't. It was an amazing, amazing experience for me. As I said, I'm still reaping the benefits of that whole experience. So I did 2 semesters of the performance program, and then I did 2 semesters of the composing arranging program. I mean, we played in big bands around LA and, nightclubs and all that kind of stuff too. So when I was there, one of the other experiences that I had was as one of the herald trumpet players in the 1984 Olympics, in the Olympic ceremonies. The opening ceremonies, if you, Google 1984 Olympic opening ceremonies, and you see the trumpet players, the herald trumpet players standing up near the where the flame was.
Oh, that's cool.
Very cool. And John Williams conducted the orchestra. They had also an orchestra from made up of LA studio musicians who did some other they played some other works. Well, they played his march, his Olympic theme. So it was cool to be there with him, and it was just a really amazing experience.
So, Vince, you mentioned that you started composing. You talked a little bit about your early experiences composing. Especially, you talked about playing the piece you wrote with 3 notes. Can you tell me a little bit more about that? When did you make the transition into full-time composing, or more full-time composing, I guess is what I'm asking.
Yeah, well, I'd been teaching for years and using great pieces from wonderful composers, and I just one day I kind of thought, I think I can do this. So I decided to give it a try, and geez, that was maybe in 94, I think. Or no, sorry, not 94. It may be 2004. Um, yeah, so I don't know. I just kind of had an idea for a piece of music, and for concert band. I had already done one for stage band for big band, and I remember I saw this documentary on the Learning Channel about tsunami and what a tsunami was, and I thought, wow, I learned about that way, back in high school. I know what those are, and not many people were using the word. You didn't hear it in very many people talking about it, but so I thought I think I have an idea about writing a piece around this, and so I did. I wrote that piece, and I sent it into Alfred to Bob Sheldon, and it was that Christmas that he said, I think we want to hold on to this till next year. Our catalog is full now, but I really like this piece, and do you mind if we hold on to it? I said, sure. I was like blown away that he would even answer my mail. And that December, the tsunami in Asia hit. That was and so yeah, it was like so all of a sudden it was it was a super tragic event, and it was just everybody was talking about tsunami, and so I decided to change the title, actually, out of respect. We were going on a band trip, my secondary school where I teach. We were going on a band trip to Europe, and we were going to play that piece, but I changed the title, and yeah. But by the time it was published, it went back to tsunami because it was a little bit after that, and the news had sort of died down on it. But that was my first piece. Now I'd sent that into Alfred with another piece. It's interesting. It was called Crusade. It was a grade 1 piece, and I almost didn't put it in the envelope. I had it in the envelope halfway, and I thought, nah, I don't know if it's any good. I'm not going to send it. And then before I sealed the envelope, I may as well put it back in, and who knows what can happen. Well, that turned out to be my highest selling piece.
Do you have any self-published music, or is it all commercially published?
It's all commercially published. I thought about that, actually, when I first had the idea to start writing. I thought, maybe I can publish myself. And I looked into it, and I realized the money that it takes to market your work and produce it and print it. And there's really something to be said for the process of having an editor is gold. Having someone to look at your work and ask you questions about it. Hey, have a look at the ending. Do you think if you could come up with something else, what would you do? Or, you don't have to change it, but, just kind of think outside the box here, maybe. Or, your oboe looks a little lonely in measure 32. By the time you go through the process of editing with a really fine editor, and Bob's amazing, it's a different piece. And that's not a different piece, but it's a much better piece. It's a piece where you've been, I guess, inspired to think in different ways that you hadn't been thinking with that particular work. Maybe, you try to, the process of creation is so mystical sometimes. When you get in that flow, right, that flow state that people talk about, and it's an amazing place to be. If I could turn on the light switch or snap my finger and get into it on demand, I would just love it. But you go through this whole process, and then someone else looks at it and they see it and hear it differently than you did, and they come at it with a different perspective, and they give you some food for thought. And oh my gosh, yeah, of course, yeah. Well, you know what? That's an interesting way to think about that. Oh well, if I were going to do that, then I might change this part here. And sometimes all Bob might say is, like a technical point in measure 62. And when I look at that, I'll say, now, like I do it myself now. I say, why did I do it that way? And I could have done it this way. So I'll send it back to him with his correction, and then maybe, a partial revision there of the musical idea.
So let's talk about your process for writing a new work for band. What does that look like? If maybe let's take it from a commission standpoint. If someone were to want a Vince Gassi piece and they approached you, what would that look like from both the commission and then through the beginning of the work?
Okay, so I will talk to the commissioning party about, if it's a school, what their program's like, what are the strengths and weaknesses, or what's the occasion, if it's a commemoration of a new school, which I've had, or some commissioning parties just say, oh, just write whatever you want. Oh, thanks. So some initial conversations, and then I will send them a contract with, fee structure and timelines and what they get and what I'm going to provide and when. So then the work starts. I have to sit down and start thinking, what do I want to say? What is it I want to express in this piece? And how does that relate to who's asking me to write this? The very first commission I had was I did the Western Albemarle County High School Honors Band in Virginia, and so it was, I had to go and do the honor band weekend and do the concert, but also write a piece to be featured in that concert. And I think I must have started it about 20 times, to be honest with you. I would sit down and try to come up with an idea, and I don't like that, and crumple up the paper, throw it away. I think I honestly must have done that about 20 times. Started pieces, and they're lurking somewhere on my hard drive. And then I stopped and I took a breath and I said, you know what? I want to do some research on Virginia and the Chesapeake Bay, and I found out there's so much rich history there, from colonial lighthouses to Civil War, the ironclads. I got so intrigued with the story of the ironclad in the submarines in the Civil War. They have the Underground Railroad, was through there. Pirates like Blackbeard, and so it was so rich. And I just got this really clear sense about what I wanted to say in the music. And so I called it a Chesapeake Bay adventure, because the whole thing just sounded like, so much great history. It even goes back to the Revolutionary War. There's some really very cool history there. So that's where I started. And once I had that initial idea, a lot of it just followed. I don't want to make it sound like it, it was, I was just taking dictation there. But once you come up with an idea, a musical statement that you feel good about and that you feel is appropriate, then a lot of decisions are sort of, the next decisions become easier. Someone once told me that composing was the process of making, thousands of decisions. And so when you can narrow things down, what's the grade level? What's the style? Those kinds of decisions start to narrow your focus on, and your ideas start to become clear about what you want to do. Then that's the other thing, is your own voice. What personally do I want to say about this? Then I've had other commissions where it was literally like they wanted to commission a grade 4 piece, but we need it in 2 months. Are you interested? And I said, oh gosh. And this was over the phone. So I literally pulled the phone away from my mouth and I went, oh my God, what am I going to do? I don't know if I can do this. This is terrible. Say no, say no. And then I put the phone back on my ear and I said, yeah, I think I can do that. That'll be no problem. And, so I came up with this piece. I wrote this. It was an intense, very intense couple of months. It was actually quite exhilarating. And then, I was very happy with the final product. And the band is just, they loved it and thought it was the cat's meow.
I'd like to take a short break from our episode to invite you to listen to my music at markjconnor.com. I am always seeking opportunities for collaboration. If you are interested in commissioning a new piece of music for me, having me work with your students in person or via Skype, or to just say hello, please drop me a line at markjconnor@gmail.com or through the contact form on my website. So Vince, where do you draw the line between healthy and unhealthy competition in music?
Yeah, I don't like it. I'm gonna just say it right there. I don't like it. I mean, I know that there's festivals. We used to go to the festival or take our band to the band festival, and you're always worried about, am I going to be, my kid's going to play better than the other kids? So that's another thing. There's another place where fear seeps in, and we're not conscious of it. It's just naturally there, and so you tend to push your kids harder because you don't want to, you want to be the best band. You want your kids to sound great. I mean, it's a good experience for them if they do, but gosh, if you're just beating them over, the head with a chair or a whip or something just to get those notes out of them and get them to play that, 5% better, and it turns into an unpleasant experience, then it's not good. So in our high school, we actually stopped doing festival. And now I'm not advocating to, that there should be no festivals. I've gone to some festivals and I've seen kids have great experiences. And so they have their place. But just for a few years in my high school, my colleague, we decided we're not going to do a festival. We're going to take a trip to Europe with these kids and we're going to, play some public concerts. And that experience, I think, when they got there, I think they were more motivated to sit up straight and play their best and to work toward learning their parts and playing as a band and all of the great musicianship, benefits that has. And we did one year we did the Harrogate Festival in Harrogate, England. And that was a very stagnant experience. But the next trip that we did, we were just public concerts. We played in cathedrals, concert halls. We played in the State Concert Hall in Romania. Beautiful concert hall. And it was like the world's greatest piano was there. And I had kids guarding the piano while we set up the band so nobody touched the piano. It was an awesome concert, though, and we had a great time.
All right, Vince. So how do you achieve a work-life balance in your career?
As I was starting to write more music and at the same time that you're teaching and your kids are growing up. And I had a friend who recommended this book called Getting Things Done by David Allen. And it's a project management. It's just a way to keep track of all your projects and to keep that stuff out of your head. I mean, your head is for having ideas, not for holding them. And, there are ways you can do that. Obama actually, I read an article where he used to wear a blue or a gray suit every day, just to cut down on all of the little decisions that you make, in your day. If you cut them all out, then you would have more energy to make life and death decisions. So, not that it's based on Obama's philosophy, but the idea behind keeping your head empty of stuff that just gets cluttered in there.
Right. Sure.
Yeah. So to answer your question, so through that, getting things done system or methodology, there was an app that's written primarily around that philosophy of keeping everything in lists and keeping, things not in your head and organized. And it's called OmniFocus, and I use it. So I started using it, about 5, 6, 7 years ago, maybe. And it truly does keep 90% of things that the things that are in my head are things like, what am I going to talk about on Mark's podcast? Where am I going to go with that next piece? How am I thinking about this project? Or as I said, I was just finished writing my dissertation. And so what's in my head are the creative ideas, not the things that you have to remember to do. And so that's been a tremendous help for me, is to keep things in their place. And I only see them when I need to see them. I only see things that I need to be reminded about at the time that I can actually do something about. The other thing that I have to say is that I have an incredibly supportive spouse, Allison. She's amazing. She, behind every successful man is an amazing woman, and she's just that. She's fantastic and understands what I do. And, I would often show her, here's what I'm writing today. What do you think of a title? Have you got any good ones? But she truly understands the process, the creative process. She's a musician herself, and so she just makes so much happen that I don't have to worry about, and so I love her for that.
So you already mentioned it earlier, but what do you think, beyond what you have already said? What are the challenges facing music education, and how can we best meet them?
How can we best meet them? Well, I think as teachers, as music teachers, we need a lot of support. I mentioned some anecdotes when I was early in my career. It's so important. Every teacher needs that kind of support. I think also that students need to be involved in the creative process more, to apply those. And I think the creative process is I don't know, maybe it's becoming more understood today, but I think it's still, there's a lot of misunderstanding. I think teachers think, oh, well, to teach composition, I have to have lots of theory and that's the way to do it. And that's not. No, that's theory. Okay, music creating is creating. You give them the theory when they need it. Not. There are students who study theory at a conservatory for years and don't create anything. So, a better understanding of the creative process. I read a great book once by Walter Pittman, and he wrote that community bands in Ontario in the early 1900s, there were just so many of them around. And when music became an official part of the curriculum, because it wasn't always, but when it did, the community bands started to disappear. And so I think culturally, we've gone through changes that maybe we're never going to get back to. There are great programs, great secondary school programs and middle school programs. But I think culturally, as a wider, more broader culture, we don't value it enough. When one music educator said to me, what are we seeing more advertised on television, hockey or music? And if it's music, it's not the music that we're teaching in schools.
All right, Vince, what advice would you give your younger self? Maybe the Vince who was looking at across the podium at his high school graduation.
I would say, write more music, play more music, conduct more music. Don't let fear hold you back, because we all experience fear. I'd love to read this if I can find it, this quote, Fear, by Jerry Goldsmith. He was asked about what is his process when he sits down and he's going to start writing a film score. And he said, I think the basic process of creativity is always the same. You sit down with the blank page and you put things down till you get the right thing. I think the great part of creativity is overcoming fear. Fear is a given, and you sit down and you have to begin something. Don't be afraid to be filled with the fear, because it goes with the turf. Coming up with the idea of coming away empty-handed is paralyzing, but you've got to move on in spite of that, because you can get over it, and it's not easy. Sometimes it's easy, and sometimes it ain't so easy. And that last sentence, sometimes it's easy, sometimes it ain't so easy, and that's so true. It's just like you gotta work through it and find, get relaxed and try to find your flow state. But I would say have confidence in yourself, because there's a lot of fear and there's a lot of self-doubting that happens to us. I can't write music. Oh my gosh, can I? Oh my gosh, that piece I just heard was so amazing. Can't even conceive of how I could even do something like that. There's so much amazing, as I said before, amazing players and writers. Is just sometimes, depending on how you let that come in through your lens, it can defeat you, or it can, just get you jazzed up. To give you an example, when I go to the Midwest, the first Midwest I went to blew my mind. It just blew my mind in every of the performances I heard, the pieces that I heard, the age levels of, kids whose feet don't even touch the floor coming to play at the Midwest. So that was back in, I think, 2005 that I went. I haven't missed a year. And guaranteed, every time I come home from the Midwest, I have 47 pieces I want to write. I just get so inspired by hearing all of the wonderful music and meeting all of, people who create music, whether they're players or conductors or composers. And they're such great people. They're just like, normal, just like you. And I just come home thinking, I have so many ideas I want to write about, and I'm inspired to write because the people I just met, are just like me.
Yep. Yeah. Midwest is special. All right, Vince. So this is not meant to be morbid, but if you could plan it out, what would be the final work that you'd like to conduct or hear?
The final work that I'd like to conduct, I don't know if it'd be the final one, but it's one that I wanted to do. Last year, I had the opportunity to work with a symphony orchestra to conduct them at an arts festival, and they gave me this big long list of works that we were going to do, and most of them got taken off that list. I'm not sure why, but one of them was a Mahler Fourth Symphony, third movement, and for a month I dove into that thing, taking it apart note by note. I was watching the Berlin Philharmonic and all these other orchestras doing it for interpretation, and I was practicing the movements, of conducting, and I was loving it so much. And then they took it off the program, and because it was other groups that were involved and they were running over time. So I never did get to conduct it, and I would love to do that piece. I think it'd be great. And I'm sure, the planets, how about conducting that? That'd be marvelous. Or Nessun Dorma. I would love to conduct that. There's just a lot of great works to do. So I think that would probably be the one. I got to say, though, I'd love to conduct a Jerry Goldsmith piece. There's a piece called, just remembered, The Thunder of Imperial Names, that he wrote, that's not published. And I heard one of the bands in Washington do it, and it's not available. I have contacted them, and you can't get it anywhere. But it's a gorgeous piece. And it's a lot of place names in the U.S., rivers and cities, and, the Rappahannock. And there's a narrator there saying all of these place names and how wonderful they sound. And he wrote this piece of music around it. I think I would love to conduct that piece.
Cool. Yeah, I'd never heard that one. All right, Vince, is there anything coming up that you'd like to share or promote?
Yeah. At the next Midwest, so in 2018, in December, I'm doing a workshop called Digital Workflows for Music Directors. And I've been doing a lot of music direction lately. Mary Poppins, Little Mermaid. The last one I've done is Beauty and the Beast. And with each one of those, I've started to, as you know, the process of absorbing all the music, lyrics, orchestrations, timings, dialogue, blocking, even just the audition process. I counted almost up to 150 tempo changes in either Little Mermaid or Beauty and the Beast. And some of them are minute. Okay, so like their half note equals 140 for one verse. The next verse is a half note equals 142. I defy anybody to be able to do that without a metronome. So thinking, how am I going to do this? I programmed them all into my metronome, and I practiced like the changes. Like every day I would practice these until they were sort of internal. And then when I rehearsed them with my cast, when they rehearse at the exact tempo that they're going to sing each verse in, and you do that every rehearsal with them for 3 months, they internalize that, and your job is so much easier. So, we did 140 auditions, and after the first 5, you start to forget about what you heard the first time, and if you don't have great ways of capturing what you're hearing. So I developed through the use of a number of apps and devices, ways of taking all of that information and sort of sifting it down into some very simple processes that, or workflows that if you follow are going to, when I talked about Obama and decision fatigue, well, it's going to eliminate your decision fatigue and your mental fatigue of having to climb that Mount Everest of data that you need to absorb as a music director. So that when you get to opening night, you're not thinking about anything else but that music, and you're in the moment. So that's my workshop. It's got lots of cool, apps and how to use them on your devices, and for just automating workflows and studies and how to get to nail all those, minute tempo changes and not, because you want to do them the same every night. Every audience comes in should get the same show. And so what if you're feeling sluggish, you're tired, you had, not enough sleep, or you ate something that's upset you, and all of a sudden your tempos are all over the place.
All right, Vince, how can people get in touch with you?
Well, I have a website, vincegassi.com, www.vincegassi.com. There's a link there if you want to contact me. My email is vgassi@rogers.com, ROGERS. Those are 2 easy ways to get in touch with me. I'm on Twitter, I'm on Facebook, the whole LinkedIn, Instagram. Just there's so many ways to get in touch with people.
Cool. Vince, thank you so much for your time.
Mark, thank you. I think what you're doing is amazing. And like I said, I'm going back to the very beginning, and I'm doing one podcast every couple of days. I want to get caught up on everything that everybody has had to say so far.
I appreciate that.
I hope you keep going.
Gonna try.
Hope you do 100 more.
All right. Thanks so much, Vince.
Okay, Mark, take care.